Alright, hello everybody. Welcome back to another monthly wrap-up. Here is an overview of what I read in July and a look at some of the books that I'm hoping to get through in August. This was a really good reading month. I've got quite the stack here, so we're just gonna jump right into it in hopes of making this video not too long. The first few books that I read were actually for a video that will be coming out hopefully sometime this month. We'll see if you can get the gist of what the video is based off of the books. But the first book that I read this month for that video was Juan de la Rosa. It is by Nathaniel Aguirre. I looked up how to pronounce it, but it's been a month since I did that and I think I might have butchered that. But it is also translated by Sergio Gabriel Weisman. Basically what this book is it is a memoir by a fictional member of the Bolivian independence movement, and it kind of just walks through his experiences with the battles that were happening in his town and getting involved in the fight for independence in Bolivia. So that is Juan de la Rosa. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. It did pleasantly surprise me. I thought it was really good for being like a fictional memoir. It had some really fun stuff. The characters in here were really funky, and overall I would recommend it if you want to get a better look at kind of life in Bolivia at that time. Again, more info will be coming about this one soon, so I'm not going to go too in depth with it. The next book that I read was The Promise by Sylvia Ocampo, translated by Suzanne, Jill Levine, and Jessica Powell. This one is basically a short story about a woman who falls overboard on a cruise ship, and you're just kind of following her thoughts about the people in her life as she's floating in the water thinking she's probably going to die. I gave this book 2 stars. Overall, I think it is something that if you went into it planning to read it kind of more like poetry, it's something you might enjoy. Personally, it's just not my cup of tea. The next one that I read is A Chronicle of a Death Foretold by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and this one is translated by Gregory Rabassa. I did end up giving this one 3.5 stars. So this book is basically a look at the investigation into a murder that occurred a while ago in this small town, and it's kind of looking more so at why all of these people who knew that the murder was going to happen and knew that these 2 boys had set out to kill this man didn't ever warn him. And pretty much the whole town knew, and he still ended up dying. And so it's kind of more a look at like human behavior and why people would go about not telling someone about their imminent murder, more so than like a murder investigation. So I thought it was good. It is really short. And that's kind of sums up my thoughts on it. Again, more in-depth review to come soon. Then I took a little bit of a break from reading books for that video just because a lot of them were kind of similar vibes, and so I wanted a break, and I had gotten a new Agatha Christie. This one is The Murder on the Links. This one is number 2 in the Hercule Poirot series. Basically, I don't want to describe too much about this book, but essentially it's just your classic murder mystery. Poirot goes with his friend Hastings, who's in a lot of the Hercule Poirot books, and he's investigating the murder. A guy reaches out for him for help, and then he shows up and the guy's already dead, and so they're trying to investigate that guy's murder. This one was one of my not less favorite, but it definitely isn't my like favorite Agatha Christie that I've read, so I did give it 4.5 stars. Not that I necessarily have anything to critique about it. I just am trying for ranking purposes to not give every book over 5 stars so that I can kind of keep track of which ones were my favorites and which ones were like not my top favorites. But overall I thought this one was good. I think this was one of the, I don't know, I just had less fun with this plot than some of the other books I've read by her. Then I did have one book that I DNF'd. This is going back to that video that I was working on. I started reading Isabel Allende's The House of the Spirits, and this one's translated by, why did they not put them on the front? Translated by Magda Bogen. This one's basically following some generations of this family in, I believe, Argentina? Could be wrong on that. One of the family members is kind of in touch with the spirits, hence the name. I did quit reading this at page 145. Basically, there were just some themes of this book that just kept coming up that I just didn't really feel like reading. So I did end up DNFing this one. Again, I go more in depth in that video, but to finish off that video, this is the last one that I read for that one. I picked up The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho? I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, and I know I looked it up at one point, but I should have re-looked it up for this. And this one, does it even say who translated it? Translated by Alan R. Clark. So, this one, if you don't know about The Alchemist, is basically the story of this boy who is trying to follow his fate. He's having this recurring dream, and so he goes to try and find his treasure, and it's about going on this adventure and following your dreams, and about how to like accomplish the challenges that you were fated for. This one I gave 4 stars. I thought it was really good. It's one of those books that I think if you took your time to really sit and think deeply about it, it could be much more meaningful than if you just do a surface read. So at some point it would be interesting to go back through and try and like annotate this. That's pretty much all I have to say about that one. And that was the final book that I read for that video. So the next few books I'll get a little bit more in depth on. The next one that I read was We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. Basically what this book is you are following this narrator who the summer before was at her family's private island, and something happened. She ended up with a head injury. She doesn't really know what happens, and she's pretty sure that everybody's not telling her the full truth about how she got injured. And so you're following her as she goes back to the island to try and figure out what happened with her head injury. I gave this one 4 stars. I thought it was really good. I never saw the ending coming. It is quite the twist. I know this one's really popular, so there's a lot of stuff out on the internet about it, but I thought it was really good. I think a lot of people have mixed feelings about this book because you are following the narrator who has brain damage from this accident, and it is written in a way that you are really seeing through her head. So there's incomplete sentences, there's things that kind of repeat, there's weird enters, and it's just not like your typical writing because it's trying to follow along what would be happening in her brain as she goes through trying to get her memory back. So I think a lot of people don't like the writing. I personally think it was really well done to give you the feeling that you are in her head. But if stuff like that bugs you and you are someone who can't handle more like stylized writing, then this probably is a book that would bug you. But personally, I thought it worked really well. Overall, I would recommend, but I can see how it has so many bad ratings too. Just because I think the writing style is a little bit unique. Then the next book that I picked up is And Then You Die by Michael Dibdin. From what I understand, this is like book number 8 or something in a series with the same detective. I got it at a thrift store, didn't know anything about it, and so I did start with number 8. I don't think that you would need to read these books in order. I felt like I wasn't necessarily missing anything having jumped into book number 8. So basically what this is you have a detective who worked with the Italian police, and he's basically in hiding because he is going to be a witness against some members of the mafia. And so he's at this beach resort town hiding out, trying to keep himself safe before trial. Sort of like a witness protection thing, but he's basically just in forced retirement, and there's not necessarily people protecting him. And then somebody turns up dead on the beach that he is hiding out at, and so he's having to go and take actions to see if they found him or if this is just a coincidence, and what's happening. I did end up giving this one 3 stars. This book reads pretty much exactly like a police procedural show. It's not so much like a mystery that you're trying to solve. You're pretty sure you know what's going on and you're just kind of following through how he deals with it. Based on the quote here and some comments that I was reading, a lot of people compare this to Pink Panther, the inspector in there, that he just kind of happens upon things. I think if you took it a more humorous route, you'd enjoy this book. I don't know that the humor came across very well for me personally. I can see how if you made this into a TV show, you could make it funny. But I personally don't feel like from how the writing was that I found it funny. I feel like it kind of missed the mark on that point. But maybe if you read it differently and you just took things a little bit different, you would find the humor in it better than I did. I thought it was average. I know there are probably lots of people who would love this over like a classic just mystery story. So if you're someone who really likes police procedurals and you want a book that has similar vibes, I think that this hits the nail on the head. I just personally like more of a mystery than a police procedural. And then the next book that I read was, listened to, was an audiobook, and that is A Line to Kill by Anthony Horowitz. This is number 3 in the Hawthorne and Horowitz series. That's hard to say. Basically, without getting into too much, the premise of these books of the series is that you have a detective who has approached the author, who is Anthony Horowitz. It's kind of this whole meta thing, but he approaches Anthony to write his memoirs and follow him around on cases to write these books. And so you're getting basically the book of the case that he followed Hawthorne around on. So book 1 and 2 kind of follow that. Book 3, they are now on publicity for book 1, and they go to a remote island for a literary festival to promote the book. And while they're there, somebody dies, and so they start investigating the murder. I gave this one 3.5 stars. I feel like so far out of the series, the first one was my favorite. This one, I feel like just not a lot happened character development wise. The first book I definitely had the most, where we were getting to know everybody, and I feel like we've just kind of plateaued on how much we know the characters. Hawthorne's a character that's pretty private about his personal life, and I feel like the first book and even kind of the second book we were digging in and getting to know more about him. I don't feel like we got to know that much more about him in book 3. So character development wise, this one was the least exciting. There is one more book in the series, so hopefully we get some of the answers that I've been wanting out of the whole series in the 4th book. But overall, it's a good mystery book. I don't really have too many complaints about it, other than that the character development kind of dropped off in this book. After that, I picked up Speaker for the Dead by Orson Scott Card. This is book number 2 in the Ender's Game saga. I think is what it's called. Lots of people call it the Enderverse, but this is like specifically the book that comes after Ender's Game. And basically, you're just following the aftermath of what happens in Ender's Game and kind of following what Ender does after all of the stuff that goes on in the first book. Pretty much as I can say without spoiling stuff from the second book. I gave this one 4 stars. I thought that this one was really good, and honestly I might like this one better than Ender's Game. One fun thing, and I don't know if this is in every edition, but the introduction in this book was actually super fascinating. It kind of talks about his story of creating Ender's Game and the whole universe, and how this was the book he originally wanted to write, but he needed to write Ender's Game first in order for you to have the groundwork and the character knowledge in order to understand this book. So, super interesting introduction. If you have the introduction in your copy, I would highly recommend reading it. I thought that this book gave us a lot more character development wise than Ender's Game did. You really get to see the characters in depth. It's much more emotional, less plot heavy. But there is still definitely a plot. I will say with both this book and Ender's Game, I feel like they start slow and you're really getting the groundwork laid. And then all of a sudden at some point in the book, it just picks up and the rest of the book just speeds by. I feel like that happened with me with both books, where Ender's Game, I got like halfway through and all of a sudden I read the rest of the book in a day because I got hooked. Same thing happened here. I got to a certain point where I just didn't want to put the book down and I just had to keep going. But you do have to get through the first slow part at the beginning where you have all the groundwork being laid. So that's kind of my thoughts on Ender's Game. I definitely want to continue it. I will say after reading Ender's Game, I didn't quite get the hype. I was a little like, why do people love this so much? Like, it's a good book, don't get me wrong, but I didn't quite understand why it has such a fan base. But having read this, I think I get it a little bit better. I think I get it a little bit better. So that's Speaker for the Dead. I definitely think I want to continue it. I have decided to read them in publishing order. I know there's lots of different ways that you can read the Ender's verse, and you can read them in chronological order, which doesn't actually start with Ender's Game. There's books that come before that chronologically, but I've decided in order to not spoil stuff for myself, I think the best route is to go in publication order. So that's what I'm doing, but again, I think there's lots of different ways you can read these. But that's Speaking for the Dead. Would highly recommend, especially if you've read Ender's Game. I would pick up Speaker for the Dead. Then the next book that I picked up was Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. This book basically is following Shakespeare's family, and you're kind of getting the whole story of his wife and child Hamnet. Hamnet is actually historically the name of one of his children, and it's believed that Hamnet is where the play Hamlet came from. And so Hamnet, we know, died from, we're assuming, the plague early on. Again, there's not a ton that people know about Shakespeare historically, like actual facts. But basically what she did is, based off of those few facts, that we know he had a son named Hamnet who died, and then he wrote the play Hamlet. She took that, kind of expounded on it, and created this really beautiful story about the mom and the son Hamnet. The interesting thing about this book is the whole point of it is to refocus on his family and some of the people that would have been impacted by him without ever actually mentioning Shakespeare. So there's not once where you will see his name in here. You can infer who it is. You kind of know who she's referring to when she talks about Shakespeare, but she never once uses his name, which I thought was an really interesting choice to try and bring focus off of the celebrity and look at the rest of the family as the main characters. I thought this book was really beautifully written. It's very emotional. I will say I didn't give it 5 stars just because I feel like it was almost a little too, not flowery, but descriptive sometimes for me. I feel like there were a few times where I kind of checked out just because it took so much brain power to read through all of the descriptions. It wasn't quite so straightforward. You definitely had to think through things. But if you're someone who really likes very descriptive, beautiful writing, this would totally be right down your alley. Then after Hamnet, I went back to my Agatha Christie's. This one is The Mysterious Affair at Styles, which is actually book number 1 in the Hercule Poirot series. I've decided that I want to try and go back and read them in order as much as possible. I've kind of jumped around a lot, picking the ones that I had heard of, but I've learned that some of them are actually really interconnected and reference other books, and so I want to try and read them a little bit more in order. So this is The Mysterious Affair of Styles. Basically, this is where we get the introduction into his friend Hastings that shows up in a lot of the other books. His friend Hastings goes to stay with the family while or with some of his friends and their family. While he's staying there, the mom dies. And so he happens to have connected with Poirot, invites Poirot in to investigate the murder. But I did give this one 4.25. 4.5. I will say this isn't my favorite of her books. I feel like it did, I don't know, it just wasn't the craziest plot. It wasn't the biggest twist at the end. It definitely feels a little bit more like you're laying the groundwork for some characters to be set up in the series. It's very much so an introduction into Hercule Poirot and how he works. Again, it's still a really good book. I'd highly recommend it. Just for ranking purposes of which ones are my favorite, that's why it gets less stars, just because I liked it less than the other ones, but that doesn't mean I didn't like it. Then, the last book that I read this month is The Falcon Thief, and this is my first attempt at reading true crime. I've never read a true crime book. Basically, this is about a famous or notorious, however you want to put it, Falcon smuggler. And so he has been going to different countries, illegally collecting eggs and then smuggling them to other countries to hatch them and sell them to rich people who are into falconry. And then it's about the detective in England who caught him and kind of how that whole story unfolds. So you're definitely following the Falcon Thief from his childhood. You're following the detective all through his career and how he got to the point where he is investigating wildlife crime. I thought it was very interesting. It's also quite recent. Like, some of the final cases and the final arrest at the end was like 2017, 2020. All this stuff was happening really recently. So it was kind of interesting to see that this stuff is happening. I learned a lot about falconry and the black market for birds and just all sorts of random things that happened to play into this case and how it all went down. So I thought it was really interesting. The author was able to put it in a really easy way to read. I gave it 4 stars for what it is. I think it's great. If you want to get into true crime but you don't want to start with like a freaky murder one, this would be a great option to get into true crime without getting like freaked out. Alright, those are all of the books that I read in July. It was a really good reading month. I read a very wide variety of genres in there. I had some mystery, some true crime, some memoirs, some fantasy realism, all sorts of stuff this month. So it's kind of all over the place. But really quick before I end this video, I wanted to quickly touch on some of the books I plan in reading in August, aka my TBR to be read list. I've had a really hard time coming up with what I wanted to put on this list, mostly because I'm not sure how much I'm going to read in August. We're going to be road tripping back to Utah this month, so that'll be like a week or so that we'll be in the car. I don't know how much we'll be doing. We'll definitely be listening to some audiobooks. And then not too long after we get back from Utah, school starts, I go back to work, and I have no idea how my schedule is going to look and how much I'm going to want to read. So that being said, I've picked a pretty small TBR in hopes that I can actually get through it and I'm not like setting myself too high of a bar. But I think I should be able to read more books than this. The other reason that I've had a hard time picking my TBR is because right now we are in an Airbnb in Charlotte, and about halfway through the month we will get home to the rest of my books, and so I kind of need to rethink through what books I have there that I'm wanting to read, since I will have a bunch more options when we get home. So I've just picked a few books off of what we have here with us that I will probably be reading for this first little bit as we're kind of road tripping / our last few days here in Charlotte. And then when I get home, we'll see if I've gotten through those, then I'll pick some more books. If not, this might just be a small reading month. But that being said, here are the books that I have chosen for my August TBR. The first one is actually one that I've already started. This is Poirot Investigates. It's number 3 in the Hercule Poirot series. This one's actually a collection of short stories, which is kind of fun. I have, again, already started it. I'm currently on short story number 5. So I've read 4 of them. Technically I've read 5 of them because I did already read one book that was in this collection, or I listened to it on an audiobook with my mom. So I did already listen to The Jewel Robbery at the Grand Metropolitan, so I won't be rereading that one. So technically I've already done 5 of them out of here. But this is just a fun whirlwind collection of some little short stories. So I will be finishing this book in August, probably before we leave for Utah. Then the next book that I'm hoping to read this month is The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. If you've watched some of my other reading videos, you know I'm a big fan of 39 Clues. And I read 39 Clues a lot when I was a kid. I have been rereading them now as an adult. still love them. But I wanted to see if I can find something a little more like an adult version of it. And so me and my husband were doing some research, and he found a lot of people saying that the Da Vinci Code is kind of an adult version of 39 Clues. I have seen the movie already, but I'm interested to see if this differs very much from what the movie was like. It's been a little bit since I watched it, so I don't know how much of it I actually remember. But there is a whole series, and so I want to read this one first before I get into the rest of the series, and so I'm hoping to read The Da Vinci Code this month. The next one is The Naturals by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This one has been all over the internet lately, so I feel like it doesn't need much of an introduction. Basically, everybody says it's like a YA Criminal Minds. I have not seen Criminal Minds, so I don't know. Maybe that's true. But basically it's about these teenagers who are really good at specific skills, and the FBI kind of makes a team of them to go and investigate cases. So this one will just be a fun mystery read. I did really love the Inheritance games. I read those in like a week, so I'm hoping that I'll really like this one as well. And then the last book that I'm putting on my TBR for this month is Strange the Dreamer. This one is a fantasy book. To be honest, I don't know a ton about it, but I've heard really good things about it, and the cover is just so pretty. So again, I don't really know much about it, but I didn't really read much fantasy this month, and so I wanted to have a good fantasy pick on my TBR for August. And that's the end of this video. There will probably be other books. I know there will be a few audiobooks to listen to as we drive back to Utah, so I will get a few other books in that way. But that's my plan for August. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you have read any of these books and you have thoughts, I'd love to hear them down below. If you have any other books based off of these that you would recommend, please let me know. I'm always looking for more books to read. Again, keep an eye out because the video featuring those first few books will be coming to my channel sometime this month. So if you are interested in hearing more of my thoughts in depth on those books, keep an eye out for that. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Bye.